before I even knew it was coming out of my mouth, it was it was out. And I asked my mother if my father had taken his life. I was not prepared to ask the question. I didn't know I was asking it. It just came out. And she didn't skip a beat. She said yes. And it just, everything just in that moment. I mean, you know what those old video images of testing the atom bomb look like, where the big mushroom cloud, but that was it. That was what happened inside my head, inside my heart, and that was the way things were for a very long time after.
Welcome to the Persistence U podcast with Lizbeth. That's you as in university, but we're really much more of a community here. Your host is Lizbeth Meredith. She's an author, speaker, and online teacher. Each week, she'll be delivering amazing stories from survivors and thrivers, all threaded together with a dose of persistence. We're so glad you're listening.
Sisters and brothers, it's great to be with you today, and I'm really looking forward to having a very serious talk with the wonderful author Lisa Sugarman. She is a writer. She is a mental health advocate. Previously, she wrote a lot in parenting spaces, and she has a column called It Is What It Is. And Lisa is located in Boston. She's also been affiliated with the Trevor Project, a nonprofit organization focused on suicide prevention and crisis intervention for LGBTQ people. Lisa lost her father at a very young age, and she was told how he died. It was more than 3 decades later when she actually learned how he died. Trigger alert. This is a serious topic today on suicide and suicide prevention. So when Lisa learned how her father actually died, that's when she changed everything about her work life. And I am looking forward to speaking with her today because, quite honestly, suicide prevention is a huge and important topic that we just don't talk about enough. And I think when I was a kid, I didn't know of people that I was aware of anyway, that had died by suicide. And when my children were growing up many years later in the 90s in high school, they had a number of students who died by their own hand. And it's something we don't talk about so often when it happens in families. People are encouraged to be quiet, not to speak about it, not to speak about the person that passed. It can be an extra layer of pain and grief. So I really look forward to speaking with her today. And I am so thankful that you're here. I was just reminded that the National Suicide Crisis and Hotline is 988. It can be called or texted. And just a reminder that things like suicide and all of the sadness and isolation that can lead up to it, these are things that can flourish in times when people are divided or if people feel isolated. It's so important that we do talk about what's happening with us, and help is always just a phone call, a text away. Even if people don't come from close families, don't find themselves living next to their friends, there is always help and there is always hope. Lisa Sugarman, thank you for being on Persistence U today. I really am so excited to connect with you. Your story is amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm so grateful to be here.
I was listening to bits of your story before you and I connected, and just thinking about the fact that you were a little girl when you found out that your father had died, which is very traumatic all on its own. And what was the reason you were given that he passed when you were 10?
So, right, it was 10 years old, 2 weeks almost to the day after my 10th birthday. It was very sudden. He was super healthy. He was a very, very active man. And all of a sudden, he was gone. So I was told that he had died by heart attack, which, as a 10-year-old, growing up with a dad who smoked cigarettes, and at that time, it was just starting to kind of emerge that maybe smoking wasn't so great for you, and things like heart disease ran on my father's side of the family. Other family members had heart attacks, had heart disease and that sort of thing. So it was not it was not a story that I ever had to question. It just was what it was. It made sense in my 10-year-old brain. And that was the narrative that I lived with for the rest of my childhood, young adult, adulthood, all the way up into marriage.
Wow. And then
Yeah.
what happened? How did you find out that, in fact, what you had been told was not exactly the truth at all, as far as the way that he died?
Yeah, it was not at all the truth in any way. I found out 35 years after I lost him the first time that he had actually taken his own life, which was just, I mean, mind blowing in every sense of the way it could be mind blowing. He apparently had been struggling. No one knew it. My mother didn't know it. My parents had a beautiful marriage. They were married for 18 years. They absolutely adored each other. I grew up in a house. I was an only child, but I grew up in this house where there was always laughter. My parents were always together and laughing and having conversations. And I was always very included in everything. So I had a joyful childhood. There was nothing that would have ever given any indication that my dad was not well. But he wasn't. He was one of those people who fell kind of into that bucket of not being okay on the inside, but the optics on the outside looked like he was fine. He
Right.
was a hard worker. He had a very busy, big job in the city. We lived just north of Boston, and he worked in the city. He also had another, I guess you could definitely call it a full-time job. His family was very involved in real estate, his parents, and my father really took over that business when my
Okay.
grandfather passed away. So he was, juggling two different jobs. They were very, very challenging jobs, took a lot of his time. And his family was just not a very grateful, gracious, loving, supportive family. So kind of no matter what my father did, it wasn't really enough for them.
Right.
And so that was a big piece of the whole puzzle that we learned over time. But yeah, I mean, it became an issue of me losing my father twice in one lifetime. When you
I
look
can't
at it.
even imagine. I can't imagine. Today we talk sometimes about a phenomenon called, I think it's high achieving suicide or something like that. But the sort of cliches that I grew up with, where you could tell somebody would be getting more and more depressed. There were obvious signs. Maybe they'd leave notes or make passive attempts before. And it was almost always something that you could see, and in hindsight would torture yourself afterwards. Like, wow, how did I not pay attention? They gave away all their belongings. They did all of these things. But that's not always the case.
No,
Or
no, it's not the case at all. I mean, there are usually two different cohorts of people
Mhm.
who you're dealing with. The people like you're talking about, the people who aren't well and they're not well because they're communicating it. And of course, we live in a world where we're surrounded by social media, and it's very easy for someone to put a Facebook post out there or Instagram post out there or do a TikTok video and say, I'm not okay. I'm
Right.
struggling. I'm challenged with this or with that. And then you have the people like my dad, who you would never suspect anything was ever wrong because they were always joyful. They were always engaged. They weren't in any way displaying any of those characteristics of not caring about how they look, not caring about staying in touch, giving things away, being edgier or somehow emotionally distracted. Like none of those things existed with my father. And that's often what you see with people. And it's so hard because you really can't help someone, can't really fix something if you don't know it's broken.
Right. Well, how did you take that information? How did you find out that what happened 35 years before was not as it was originally told?
So the story, as I was told, was supported by everyone in my family because my mother told everyone it was a heart attack. No one questioned that. There were actually a couple of family members who knew the truth, but it was never from day one the way my mother decided in kind of a split second moment where I was going to have to be told. She told me this story of a heart attack to save me from just having another layer of trauma and sadness and grief on top of what I was already going to experience. Like there was no way around the fact that my father was gone, but my mother had this capacity in that moment to control that narrative a little bit to somehow spare me from at least bit of that pain, which is what she did. And I'm nothing but grateful. But the people who did know never spoke a word to her, never spoke a word to me. So the way I found out, my husband and we live in a small town, North Boston, and we were just outside having lunch at a cafe. And a cousin of mine, who I don't see very often because she doesn't live in my town, she just happened to be in town. And so she stopped by and she sat down. And at this point, Dave and I think, had been married for 20 years. And our kids were definitely teenagers at that point, probably high school, middle school. And she sits down and we're talking and we're reminiscing and we're catching up on my kids and on her kids. And then very randomly, it wasn't a very climactic moment. It was just a very unexpected moment where, in the context of her asking, how are your kids? What's up with your kids? All of a sudden, she pulled the pin on the grenade and tossed a question I was not expecting. Do either of the girls have any of the same mental illness that your father had? And I just my eyes did exactly what your eyes just did. They just got huge. And I didn't know what she was referring to. I was completely unaware that anything was ever wrong with my dad. And so, but in those moments when someone really, truly surprises you, shocks you with something, you don't react in a way. You just internalize it, and you're so confused by it or shocked by it that you really don't say anything at all. And I really didn't say anything. I think I must have said they were fine at that time, which they were. And then, of course, she kind of took off the conversation in another direction. We never circled back to that. I never even asked her, what are you talking about? I don't understand where this is coming from, because I was so shocked. And it was not until a day or two later, I was with my mom and we were having lunch. And I didn't make a beeline for my mom. I didn't pick up the phone and say, what is going on? I just had this crazy conversation and what am I missing? It wasn't like that. It just was something that kind of filed into my subconscious. But the next time we were together, we were talking about my dad. We were reminiscing the way we have always done for 35 years. And it must have been something about that conversation the day before, because I said to her, kind of out of the blue, was Dad depressed? And I'd never asked her that question before. And she said, yes. And we talked a little bit about that and why that would be. And most of it I knew, and I understood it was, some of it was the family dynamic on his side of the family and stress. And before I even knew it was coming out of my mouth, it was out. And I asked my mother if my father had taken his life. I was not prepared to ask the question. I didn't know I was asking it. It just came out, and she didn't skip a beat. She said yes. And everything just in that moment. I mean, you know what those old video images of testing the atom bomb look like, where the big mushroom cloud, but that was it. That was what happened inside my head, inside my heart. And that was the way things were for a very long time after.
Did you feel angry immediately, or what did you feel?
Yes,
if anything.
Yes. I felt everything. I felt all the things. I felt like every nerve ending in my body was completely exposed. Everything was lit up and was on fire in a way. I felt anger, but I didn't feel anger in the way I think most people might expect. Like, I was not then, and have never been since, angry at my mother at all. I have never been anything but grateful to my mother for shielding me from that, because as a 10-year-old kid, I just don't think I could ever have handled knowing that he had chosen to leave and all the implications that suicide brings. But what I was furious at my dad for a very long, I would say years, for a very long time after that. I was so upset with my father because he had left my mother in that situation, in that position of having to raise me alone. My mother was 40 years old. She worked part-time as a secretary up the street. She took care of me. She took care of my grandmother. She had a very full life, but my father was the breadwinner, the primary breadwinner. And all of a sudden, my mother is now alone, and my mother is now navigating raising a 10-year-old and having her 80-year-old mother living with her. And it was just such a chaotic time. And I just was furious with him that he put her in that position.
Wow.
Yeah.
And up until that time, you'd been writing already. You were already a writer. You wrote about parenting issues. And did you have a column back then?
I did. Yeah. I started writing I would say, so our oldest daughter right now is 27. She'll be 28 this summer. So I started writing when she was about 12. I mean, I've always been a writer. I was a newspaper reporter for many, many years, wrote for magazines, but started writing a column when our oldest was about 12. So, that's about 13, 14 years ago. And the column became syndicated and it kind of caught the attention of a publisher in California. And since most of what I was writing about was really kind of that perfectly imperfectness of parenthood and stop trying to compare yourself with the Joneses and that mentality. So everything really focused on that in my work. And so we wrote a bunch of books together and I was doing the column at the same time. So I was very firmly in that parenting space and loving the work that I was doing. And then all of a sudden learned about this truth about my father's death. And I just shut down. Everything just came to a very, very hard stop. I just couldn't focus on any of that work anymore. I just needed to kind of sort through all of what I was dealing with and the implications. And my mother was so distraught for a time afterwards, initially just feeling like, oh my God, what did I do? Putting this on her now. And I'm nothing but grateful. I needed to know. And it was definitely a time. It was a time. And then little by little, after a few years, I started talking about it. I shared it with my girls, felt like they were old enough to know and that they needed to know what that inherited DNA is. And from there, it was just kind of a ripple effect where I started talking about it and I started writing about it because that's what I do. And so it made sense for me to just start doing it in that capacity. And one thing led to another, and writing became volunteering, and volunteering became another book, and another book became a podcast. And so and then I created a platform called Help Hub that is a free online directory, very, very inclusive and comprehensive directory for people to get mental health resources and crisis services and support and content. So that's where my energy's gone. And again, I always go back to the word grateful because that's what I feel.
I love that. And when this first happened that you found out, what helped before you started writing? Did you go to any therapy? Was there any support groups? I mean, what helped you kind of little by little keep moving forward?
I think in the beginning, I'll be really honest with you, I didn't move forward. I was stuck in a very strange place because when your reality like that, when something about your reality changes that dramatically, you're rethinking everything. Like this was the foundation of my whole life. I grew up as a child raised by a single mother whose father died when they were young, which, I was the only kid in my fourth grade class. I remember going back to school when my father passed away in August. And then, of course, September rolls around and you're back in school. And I was, at the time, the only fourth and fifth grader that I knew who didn't have a dad. And so I was in this crazy club of people that I was the only one. And no one knew how to handle it. No teachers really understood what I needed. I didn't know what I needed. My friends were little kids. They certainly didn't know what to even make of it. So nothing was ever talked about. And my mother was amazing in every way, but she was navigating so much. She had so much on her plate. So I didn't there wasn't therapy for me then because I was a kid and I didn't know it was a suicide. I did not start therapy, honestly, until about 3 years ago.
Okay.
I think the way that I was dealing with it in the beginning, it was just talking about it with my mother, talking about it with my husband, eventually having conversations with my kids. And the writing, I think, for me was so cathartic. It was so therapeutic. And then the conversations that I had with people who would respond to the work I was doing, people were reaching out in ways people have never reached out to me in terms of the content, that I was creating. And it was because of that, I formed all of these connections and ultimately then, started going back to therapy, really realizing that I needed somebody for me to really kind of unpack all this myself. And it was one of the greatest gifts I've ever given to myself was going back.
I like that so much. And you've done a lot in the parenting space and now you've had therapy. What would be more ideal? How would a parent broach that topic in hindsight if it was yours to make? And I'm not suggesting we're second guessing your mom because it was a different generation. But these are hard conversations, but kids do find out sometimes that their parent died by suicide.
Yeah, they do. I actually had a woman not too long ago, probably over the winter, who had read some of my work, and we didn't know each other, and she got a hold of me, and she had lost her husband. He had died by suicide, and she had a young child, and younger, I think, than I was at the time when my dad passed away, maybe 8. And she didn't know what to do. She didn't know if he had the capacity to handle it, if he could understand it, when would be the right time, what was the wrong time. And look, it's so subjective. There's no way for any one of us to say, okay, you should do this, and here's the timeline, and here's the way you do it. Like it depends on the relationship that they had with the person who died. It depends on how mature are they as a kid. Some kids are super mature at that age. Some kids are not, and everything has to be done in such an age appropriate way. There is no one formula is the answer, I guess. I think though that honesty is always the default. It should always be the default, to a point where you're at least communicating the essence of what you need to communicate. Maybe you don't give all the details. Maybe there are parts of your story that you leave out because they're a child and they can't handle it. Maybe you work with a therapist and say, listen, can we do this together? It's
Right.
never a bad idea to get help in trying to decide when to broach it, how to broach it. But I think I know myself that, granted, I didn't find out when I was 10, and I'm grateful that I didn't. But I'm so grateful that I know now. And as I'm an adult now, when I found out I was a mom, I'd already been married for 20 years. I had 2 kids. And I was so grateful that I could support my mother, who had been silently carrying this thing for 35 years of her life alone. So I can only imagine that most people in my situation or in a similar situation would want to do that, would want to be able to support their family members through it. So I would just say, if you're in this situation and you're questioning telling a child, kids are way more resilient than we ever give them credit for, number one.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, there's always a way to communicate what you need to communicate. You just have to be sensitive about it. And maybe it might mean getting a little bit of professional help to do it.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Good idea too.
Yeah.
Because if it's really, really, really difficult, doing it with a professional could be so much less daunting.
Mm-hmm.
So now you write about different things. You're on this topic and helping support people about suicide loss and sometimes prevention. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the work that you do with the hotline and your own support services that you've created, the podcast, all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you and I were talking about before you hit record, we talked about my work with the Trevor Project, which is, I light up, my face lights up every single time I talk about the Trevor Project. And for those of you listening who don't know what that is, we are the largest LGBTQ focused crisis and support lifeline for any youth ages 13 to 24. That's like our primary demographic. We will and do take calls for anybody who may call us in any demographic, but that's kind of our sweet spot, is that youth population. Trevor Project has been around for 27 years now. We have a texting line. We have the old-fashioned pick up and get an actual crisis counselor on the line that you can talk to. That's what I do. I'm on the lifeline. And we're really just there to support people in any crisis they may be in. A lot of people, I think, have this misconception that hotlines like a Trevor Lifeline or like the 988 Crisis Lifeline are just for people who are at imminent risk or high risk of suicide. That is absolutely false. It is not true. There is no bad reason to call a lifeline. If you are struggling with your sexuality, if you are struggling with abuse or homelessness, or you have anything, homelessness that you're dealing with, or job insecurity or food insecurity, like anything that is a crisis to you is something that we deal with on the lifeline. And I just hold an awful lot of space for an awful lot of people in a variety of situations, give a lot of resources, create a lot of safety plans. And it's just such a beautiful organization. And the training that I've received has made me such a better empath, such a better listener. And I can't recommend Trevor Project highly enough because it just is a very special place, a very special organization. I also work with NAMI, so that's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I am part of their storyteller program. So they're a grassroots organization that really educates people about mental illness, suicide awareness, suicide prevention. It's kind of a catch-all for everything mental health related, and they've got some amazing programming. And one of the things they offer is this free. It's free for any civic organizations or schools or communities. You can bring us in, people like me who are trained storytellers, and we share our story. And in my case, it's about suicide loss. In other people's case, it might be about helping someone in their family who is struggling with addiction or with mental illness, like lots of different things we share. And we just have open conversations in the community, sometimes with first responders, very often with first responders, just to kind of let people understand the other side of mental illness, the family side, the support side. So I do a lot of that. I also work with Samaritans here in Boston. There's a program called Safe Place. It's a virtual online support group that's super specific. It's for survivors of suicide loss. It's not just a generalized grief group. It's survivors of suicide loss, dealing with that very nuanced kind of grief. And I am a trained facilitator. So the first and the third Wednesday of every month at 6 o'clock at night, Eastern Standard Time, we hop on a Zoom call and we all just get together and talk about whatever people need to talk about. Some people don't even talk. Some people just are there to listen and be in the company of people who get it and understand. So I'm involved with that as well. And then the other thing I'm doing kind of on my own, I mean, aside from the podcast that I have called The Survivors that I have with my amazing co-host Gretchen Schoser, she and I are two different kinds of survivors. I'm the suicide loss survivor. She is an attempt survivor. We're both advocates, and we have these just very raw, open, honest conversations about suicide loss to create a community for this huge population of people who are affected by suicide. And then the other thing that I do is kind of on my own. I have a platform that I developed and launched last year. It's called the Help Hub. And it's really just it's a resource hub for anyone to find any kind of mental health related, wellness related, suicide prevention related content, crisis lifelines, tools for managing your overall wellness. And it's broken into categories. So
Okay.
if you're part of the LGBTQ community, there's a category for you, or the elderly, or children and families, BIPOC community, and so on. And there are resources that are tailored to their specific needs. So that's kind of what I do in the world that all revolves around that one issue of mental health and wellness.
That's wonderful. I mean, you've taken a situation that was very painful, but recognizing that isolation is a huge, huge part of healing for survivors and for prevention. So it's really fantastic to know that there are accessible resources and that no one has to sit with their feelings alone, whether they consider themselves to be very high achieving and things aren't going as they expected. And that's a lot of us in the world lately, a lot of us worldwide, or people who have more classic symptoms of depression and escalating issues. I mean, it's fantastic that you allow for community wherever someone's calling from.
I appreciate that. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, that can be the catalyst for someone to shift their mindset, is knowing that they're supported, knowing that they belong, knowing that even if you're one of those people in the world, and there are so many of them who they don't have a partner, they don't have a family, they don't maybe have a community or children or a rich pool of people that they can draw on. And maybe their only connection to the outside world is a virtual group, or maybe it's calling a hotline. We have so many people who call the 988 Lifeline or who call Trevor Project who may not be in what you would consider an active crisis, but they call the same time every day because they don't have anybody else to talk to, and they just want a human being to talk to share their life with. And so they call us. And that's the great thing about the Help Hub, because it puts you in contact with the resources or the communities or the tools that you need wherever you are in your struggle, if you're struggling. And I just feel so grateful that the feedback and the support that I've gotten for this platform has been absolutely overwhelming. But look, the whole idea is have a place where anybody can go when they're not okay, or even when they are okay, to find what they need. Because especially when you're not okay, last thing in the world that you're capable of is making good, rational judgments about, oh, I'm going to go here, or let me research where I can get this kind of help or that kind of help. Like you barely even know your own name when you're in a toxic headspace. So the idea is the resources are there for you. The research has been done for you. Go to what you need, click on it, and you get the help that you need when you need it.
Very nice. Very, very nice. So often people are concerned about letting down their loved ones. So even if they have wonderful friends or family, they may not want to show that side of themselves, or they may feel judged. And so it can be a lot easier reaching out to a resource where there isn't the weight of that feeling attached in addition. So fantastic. These are some great resources.
Thank you.
Definitely, we want to connect to those in the show notes. And I really appreciate your time and love to hear how this experience, although it was sad, and I'm so sorry about it, but you've allowed it to transform not just your life, but many, many other people's.
Thank you. I'm trying. That's for sure. Because look, we all have a story. We all have a story. We all have lived experience that can benefit someone. And it's very unique to each one of us, but there are points of connection that each one of us can create. And, I made the decision a long time ago that I would take what had happened to me in my life and hopefully put it out into the world in a positive way that allows other people to grab onto it and maybe find either hope or support or resources that they didn't have before.
And you're doing a great job. So thank you.
You're so welcome.
Good to meet you today.
Oh, it was great to meet you too.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. Thank you so much for listening. Now, to find out more, head on over to lameredith.com and be sure to hop on the mailing list too. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a rating and review or share with a friend. And if you really, really liked it, go ahead and subscribe so that you never miss another episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Persistence U with Lizbeth.